Welcome back. We got a couple little announcements here real quick. Next week is going to be a little bit different. We're going to do live from the boat show for the videos. We're going to be at the Wooden Boat Show at Mystic, and that will be the 24th, 25th, and 26th. We're going to do live from the show from 7 a.m. to 8 a.m., and that'll get archived and go online. So if you can't catch it at 7 live, don't worry, you'll still be able to see it. And we've got a really big announcement that we are going to make at the show. We've got a couple people that we're going to talk to about the big announcement they're in conjunction with. So stay tuned for that. We're really, really excited. And if you're in the Mystic area, if you want to come to the boat show, we're going to be at the YouTube booth. And I am told the best way to describe that is it's Land A next to the Thomas Oyster House. Not really sure what that means. Good luck. But we'll be there. It's the YouTube Boat Builder booth. We'll be there from, 3 to 5 Friday and Saturday, and from 9 to 11 on Sunday. So we'll be in the booth those hours and hope to see you then. If not, we'll be wandering around the show, and maybe we'll see you there.
Another announcement is some new additions to the shop on our website. By popular demand, various sized boxes of the wood used to build Arabella have been put together to be shipped anywhere in the continental U.S. The gem box contains a small sample of all 8 woods that have gone into the build. The keepsake box contains oak and mahogany and maybe some cedar and locust, and are great for small woodworking projects. For a bigger carving or lathe project, the Turner's collection have some chunky bits of oak and locust. And if you don't need another project on your to-do list, we've had a couple of posters made. The Woods of Arabella shows where all the various species came from before finding their way into the boat. A second poster shows a full sail plan for Atkin's Stormy Petrel design above Carolyn's drawing of Steve's modified interior layout for Arabella. And lastly, a pack of new stickers is available for your bumper, bike helmet, or guitar case. Unlike the wood boxes, the posters and the stickers can be shipped worldwide. So check out the shop on our website, acorntoarabella.com, and the link for that is in the description below. We start today steaming the last of the locust covering boards, and shortly we'll check in on all the work that's been done in the background prepping the white pine boards set aside for the deck. And later in the episode, after a short visit from Thad Danielson, Steve will show you all the plan for laying out the deck and a couple of game-changing discoveries he's made while researching how to get that done. Much has been learned about this steaming process since the first locust test piece split on the first attempt. And with every lighting of the steamer and every new steaming bag, the crew has made big and small changes to the process that has led to every single covering board steaming in successfully.
Holding the shape while you pull clamps off? Yeah, it's springing back, but what you would expect it to spring back. Okay, good. And then in my experience, you can clamp whatever sprung back out easy enough, or close to it. I feel the morning sound of hissing.
Hissing.
Could be coming.
Here it is.
So one thing we haven't figured out how to deal with reliably is the water.
It's true. We can drain it out well.
Yeah.
It just requires us tending it.
Yeah.
Which means if that's our worst problem, we've done a lot of tweaks and a lot of improvements.
Yeah.
That's probably good.
Okay.
Whoa, too much, little tiny bit out. Yeah, okay, there you go. It's a delicate balance.
I'd say the other thing that we discovered early on was the fact that we can carefully remove the fulcrum, bring the board down to the deck, and clamp while everything's still steaming and inflated.
That works beautifully.
So there's no rush. There's not like a crazy, hey, let's get this done
Right.
because we're cooling down.
Yeah,
Like this one, I think we clamped for like 30 or 40 minutes
I think so.
while it was still all inflated, still steaming.
Yeah. And at first we would blow the bag when we tried that method, but once we realized how to be super careful with the
Yeah.
delicate bag, we have all the time we need to clamp.
It's the old Yankee ingenuity of random
It's
cardboard bits
random 90-degree bits of cardboard.
on the edges of the board.
Which, like, where do you even get those?
Yeah. So as we're clamping, we put these on the edge of the board, on the top and
One
bottom.
on top,
Yep. And that protects
one on
the
bottom,
Yep.
and it doesn't break the bag like a piece of wood does. And then we clamp it.
The plan to take our swept locust and cut along the grain lines, oversized, and build a big, powerful steamer rig and steam the locust and edge set it and exaggerate its curves so that we could have the proper shapes that we need for this curvy double-ender sailboat. That cockamamie plan actually worked. And we got the locust steamed and we got the locust bent. And now that stock is ready and we have solid sweeps that we can cut our covering boards out of without having gigantically wide stock to cut our covering boards out of, we can continue on to getting ready to lay the deck. Getting all of the rough cut pine that I cut and milled about 5 years ago and stacked in the wood yard, getting that sorted, graded, thicknessed, milled down to size is a lot of work. It's a lot of hours and a lot of energy. Yeah, that's it. There they are. Yeah.
Can we see
Oh,
it?
he just jumped out of my hand. Where'd he go? Oh, there he is.
Oh my goodness.
There you guys go. Come here, I'll show you what we are hunting for. The decking for the boat is going to be 2 inches wide by 1.5 inches tall. And the best thing, the like creme de la creme out of this is going to be clear of knots, clear of sapwood, which is this gray stuff. It's pretty wide in pine. And quarter sawn. So if you look at it, if this is our board and it's 1.5 inches tall and it's 2 inches wide, we want the growth rings to be running as vertical as we can get them. At a slight angle is pretty good. At more of an angle is not so great. And anything that's closer to flat sawn is a no-go. And even tight knots are a no-go unless they're super, super, super tiny and really, really hard. And some of these boards you're gonna find are thicker than 2 inches, so they might be 2.5 or even 3. And with those, we can orient them any direction. So like, this is great. So like right here, we have really nice quarter sawn. You can see the grains running this way. And then this one is flat sawn. But if this is over 2 inches thick, what we can do is we can cut it so that the board runs this way out of it, so that now the grain is running at a better direction. If it's 1.5 now, we're not gonna have enough to plane it down. So you're really looking for like 1 3/4. What we're gonna wanna do is bring the best stuff up to the boathouse so we can pile it up on the wagon, and stuff that's just no way we're gonna get decking out of it can get stacked and stickered back in the shed here. And we'll make a pile. We'll lay out the stuff that's like mediocre. Okay. So maybe it's got some small knots, maybe the grain isn't totally perfect, and then we'll see how much glorious stuff we have. Once all of the pine was graded and sorted, and all of the good pine was up at the house, the guys ran it through the big thickness planer just a couple times on each face so that we had flat, smooth boards, and all of the fuzziness from the sawmill was gone. When we mill up the deck strakes, it's important to be able to see the defects and where the sapwood is. And on pine, there's a lot of sapwood, and we can't have any sapwood in the deck. Building Arabella, we haven't had much need to cut straight lines. Most of what we cut is curved or shaped in some way. The decking is one instance where we need to take these big, long, wide boards and very accurately cut them down to narrow strips for the decking. And major thanks to John and Wendy, who are the founders, owners, and operators of Agricola Construction on Cape Cod. They happened to have a long Festool track and saw, and they offered it up to us if we had a use for it. So John was kind enough to drive it out from Cape Cod, and we put that to use milling up the decking, and it made it really easy to line up with the sapwood and to dodge defects and to make really smooth, accurate cuts in the pine. Some of the stock was too thick for the Festool saw, so we used the big worm drive skill saw, but still used the Festool track as a guide and just ran it next to the track. And that worked really well, and it made taking all of those big boards and knocking them down really efficient. The boards are the size where it's easier to bring a tool to the board than to bring a board to the tool and run it through, say, the bandsaw or the table saw. And the Fest tool track saw makes it really simple and very repeatable to make the same size decking. Once all the decking was knocked down to close to its final dimension, I spent an entire day just standing at the thickness planer, running it all through and bringing it down to very close to its final dimensions. At this point, all of the decking is milled to within a 1/16 of an inch of its final size. And we're going to run the decking through the planer once or twice more as one big batch without adjusting the planer, so that all of them are absolutely identically the same size.
Wooden boat legend Thad Danielson stopped by to check on progress and to bring a few goodies from his shop that will come in handy when it's time for doing the rigging.
You want to tell us what these are?
Well, it's a rigging vise, and you stretch your wire, so the wire's stretched
Okay.
with tension and turned, so that you relieve some of the pressure
Of
on
the lay.
lay.
Okay.
It's really made for doing around a thimble.
Okay, so you would make the loop
But
of
for-
wire, put the thimble in there, and crank this
Right.
down till it's all nice and tight.
For a soft loop, you just have your wire out here and clamp this onto your wire.
And then these, I assume, are small, medium, large wires.
Exactly. And that's
The burliest cigar cutter I've ever seen.
yeah, you get that. With
Or
your
is that
with your
when the
sled-
crew
No!
behaves?
Morse Starrett cable cutter.
Oakland, California. All right. Who made the vise?
Who knows? It's cast bronze
Ooh, cable crimper
and a cable crimper
and some terminals.
and some terminals.
Fantastic.
Look at those things. Link Hawks was he was a character. He was a wild man.
And you said that's who the rigging vise belonged to?
Yeah. He kept animals
Okay.
in the middle of Marblehead. He had an ox that he'd walk down to the bar. My shop was in a barn that had been on the other side of the pond, behind some houses.
Okay.
And the barn either had to go across the pond or get torn down. Link got 150 steel drums
Floated it across?
and made a raft. And Gerald Smith, who was an old yacht captain and boat builder who lived right there on the pond, came over to Link one day and said, "There's no wind. Let's row it across." And they put a dory in the water and got a kid to hand the line and towed it across, rowing.
I was reading recently a book, and I came across a thing called a nib plank or a nibbing plank or a nib piece, are words that they use to describe it.
Yeah,
So normally you put the covering board in,
yeah,
and then you nib into the covering board with a straight laid deck.
yeah.
They put the covering board in, and then they bent in a piece next to the covering board and nibbed into that.
Uh-huh.
And that means we would be nibbing into pine instead of nibbing into locust, which seems a lot easier to me.
Certainly is.
And then the covering boards and the deck are different. You can replace the deck without messing with the covering boards. You can replace the covering boards without messing with the deck.
Yep.
I hadn't seen that before. Have you?
Right. No.
Any
No.
reason not to do it?
Not that I know of.
All right.
I don't know.
I suppose we should probably explain what a nib plank is, and that leads us to talking about just in general how we're going to go about the decking. So I've got some of the books here that have been my guiding light through the project, and one is Larry Parday's Details of Classic Boat Construction. It doesn't even mention the deck. He's like, you're on your own, sucker, figure it out. So Larry's useless here. And then we have Bud McIntosh, and Bud does talk about decks. So Bud has the drawings here of your typical kinds of deck. And the plans for the Ingrid and what we're going to go with are a straight laid deck. And traditionally, you would nib them into the covering board. And these nibs are for when the angle of the plank meeting the covering board would give you a delicate feather edge. So you cut it off and nib it, just like we did on the planks. And up here, they don't come to quite as much of a feather, so they didn't nib them in. So this is more of a detailed diagram of the nibs. So you can see the covering board here, and he's got the covering board scarfed. It's made out of multiple pieces because of how much shape it has. And then you cut nibs into the covering board for the planks to match into. And this is very traditional, and this is how I've seen straight laid decks done. So other things to consider while we're looking at and planning the decking is the tow rail that goes along the edge of the boat, and that's what keeps you and all your possessions from just sliding off the deck and overboard. And there's a couple of different ways to do it. So Atkin has it spec'd like this, where there's a plank on edge, and there's a big fastener, a drift in this case, which is just a giant nail, that goes down through that plank and goes through your covering board and into your plank, or through your covering board and into your clamp and shelf, but you nail that in. Another really common way to do it is to put in bulwark stanchions, and these actually pierce the deck, get attached to the planking, go behind the clamp and shelf, and you make it so that they're notched through your covering boards, and then you caulk all the way around each of those upright posts that go through. So when you read all the books and you read about tow rails and bulwarks, you pretty much see them either spike down like that for a little tow rail, or if they're too big to spike down like that, you'll see a timber let through the covering boards, and they'll caulk around the timber, maybe put some wedges in there to try to keep that tight. One of the really fun things about the project is how many books and resources I've been given since we started this. And one of those was this one, The Finely Fitted Yacht. And there's all sorts of little tips and tricks in here. But in this book, there was one in particular that I opened up and was like, that is genius. So this is what we're going to do for the tow rail. So this solves so many problems. One, you don't have to let any timbers through your covering board or through your decking. So there's no big timber around there to caulk or to leak. All that you have piercing are these 3 or 4 bolts that hold the bracket down to the deck. So that is way, way, way less likely to leak than a bulwark stanchion that's let all the way through the deck. It's much easier to bed, don't have to caulk it. Another great feature of this is that you can put your lifeline stanchions in, and the tow rail bolts to the bronze bracket. So when some Goomba who doesn't know you shouldn't pull on lifelines, or when someone gets thrown against a lifeline, instead of it just levering its little platform on deck, it's also pulling against the tow rail. So you are putting way less force on these fasteners, which leads to less of a chance of the deck leaking. And now another really neat feature of this is that you don't need to necessarily have scuppers. You could if you wanted, but you can see that this bottom rail floats the deck the whole way. So that would let the water just run off, no problem, and would make it so that you don't have to have a bunch of scuppers. And when you cut scuppers, you expose a bunch of end grain. So that is also eliminated. Another really neat feature of doing it this way is if you put in a hardwood tow rail, you can ditch your Genoa track on your deck, which is one heck of a tow stubber. And you can put a sling girth hitched around your hardwood tow rail, and you can use that for adjustable leads for any of your lines, which eliminates more holes in the deck where you would have the track and eliminates that tow stubber and keeps your deck much more clear. So that was one of the things where I was flipping through this one day and saw that, and it was like the light bulb went off. It was like, that just seems like such a better way to do it. And then I had the same experience going through this book called Practical Yacht Joinery. So this is showing a sprung deck where the planking goes parallel to the covering board. This is showing a straight laid deck where you would nib into the covering boards, but instead they put in what they call a nibbing piece, which I'm sure you could also call a nib plank. I think it's, or a nib strake. But the idea here is that you would put your covering board in, then you would spring in a piece of decking, and then you would nib into the decking instead of nibbing into the covering board. And like the bronze support for the tow rail or the bulwarks, this solves an incredible amount of problems and issues. Our covering board is black locust, which is harder and denser and more difficult to work with than white oak. So to cut all of the nibs in the covering board and have them all fit really nice is going to be a slow, time-consuming process, and we're going to have to sharpen tools very regularly because the black locust is tough. Black locust also should last an incredibly long time, and the pine deck will not last nearly as long as the locust covering boards would. So if we nib into the locust covering boards, one, it's very difficult and time-consuming to nib into the covering boards. You've seen how much work it took for us just to get covering boards to shape. If we were to mess up on a nib or something, that would be pretty catastrophic. And then when you nib into the covering boards, you expose all of that end grain. So where every one of these nibs is, there's a piece of exposed end grain in the covering boards. And then every time you cut a bulwark stanchion in the covering board, you're also exposing more end grain. And you're taking this big structural important board in your boat, and you're cutting a whole bunch of nibs, and you're putting a whole bunch of holes for bulwarks, which all lead to more exposed end grain and more potential freshwater intrusion, which leads to more rot. So I thought this nibbing piece was pretty brilliant because we can make the nibbing piece out of pine, and it will match the decking material. Nibbing into pine will be a piece of cake compared to nibbing into locust. And if we for some reason make a mistake and mess it up, it'll be really easy just to scarf in a new section of pine and keep going. It's not as catastrophic as if we mess up on the covering board. Down the road, in say 15 or 20 years, when the pine deck is worn out, it'll also allow us to take out the pine deck, take out the nib plank, put in a new nib plank, and put in a new deck. And if we make the deck strakes a little bit wider or a little bit narrower, it's okay because we're going to cut new nibs when we go to put them in. If we were to replace the decking but not replace the covering boards, we would have to make that decking fit those nibs perfectly. And when we milled the deck strakes up, if we were off by a 64th of an inch, if we were off by a fraction of a millimeter, it would add up between all of the planks and eventually our nibs wouldn't fit. So we would have to be incredibly meticulous about milling those up and getting those to fit. And it would be so much easier just to pull out the nib plank, pull out the decking, and replace that, and not mess with our covering boards. By the same token, if we smash into a dock or a seawall or get T-boned by a big boat, it's going to mess up our covering boards, but not necessarily mess up the deck. And if that's the case, we can replace a section of covering board, and we don't necessarily have to mess with cutting new nibs and getting that to fit the decking. So by putting in that nib plank, it takes the covering board and the decking and makes them kind of two separate systems that work next to each other and instead of being so intertwined. And between doing the nib plank and doing the bronze brackets to hold the tow rail, we are putting in a fraction of amount of holes and damage to the covering boards, which should make them last a lot longer and lead to a much drier boat. Because boats generally rot from the top down, and it's freshwater intrusion in holes in the deck that then start to rot out frame ends and deck beams, and it's really, really common. Freshwater is the enemy of a wooden boat. So by having the few holes possible piercing that deck, we'll have the longest lived deck.
Thanks for watching the video today, and thanks for subscribing and hitting that like button for us. And a reminder that next week's episode will be live from the Wooden Boat Show in Mystic, Connecticut. It'll come out at the usual time of 7 a.m. Eastern on Friday. And don't forget to check out all the new goodies on the website while we still have them in stock. And we'll see you next week at the boat show.